So today we're going to do a podcast on how to be a site director. And then like 3 months from now, and I actually start going to the site again because I had a birth of a newborn son. So I'm a site director remote. It's not that interesting to make a vlog. But when I start going back to the clinic, we're going to make a vlog of this very same topic, how to be a site director. And this book, if you get to chapter on site level dynamics, it's basically it, because you can be a site director of a one coordinator clinic where you are the coordinator and you are the site director. We kind of talked about in the last podcast, one of the last podcasts ago, how to 10x your site, like how to go from 100,000 in revenue to 1 million, or how to go from 1 million to 10 million in revenue, which that part I haven't done, but I've done the 0 to million many times at different sites. So all of those require some form of management, some form of site director. And even now, when I'm directing remotely from home, it's not the same as being in the clinic. Like, I'll have phone calls with my staff, try to do it regular text threads. You're still like a little bit out of touch. And you may not be out of touch on the facts, but you're out of touch on the emotions and the sentiment, which are like, these kind of subjective things you can't really discuss in a phone call. I mean, you can get someone's sense of satisfaction or dissatisfaction on a phone call, but you can't get the general mood of the clinic unless you're there. Plus, as a site director, like, let's be honest, you can't really know if your staff's putting in 100% effort or not if you're not there. And I don't expect staff to put 100% effort all the time anyways, unless it's like clutch moments when we need it. We need to go beyond 100%. I'm okay with like 75. What I'm not okay with is like 50 or less. So part of being a site director is hiring the right people so that you don't have to babysit them all the time. And I've had staff in the past, luckily not here in Yuma, but in Orange County, where you did have to babysit. And, I remember fondly, this was 2012, I would go to one of the sites and the computer of the coordinator was kind of facing the entrance so you can see what they're doing when you walk in. I would walk in, they're playing Farmville, and I'm like, okay, I'm all right with that. Like, this was 2012, Farmville was the thing. But if they're not, like, if I'm okay with that if there's nothing to do, but this person had stacks of action items. And one of the reasons I was there is because the monitors kept complaining, like, hey, these things are not getting done. So I told them, I didn't even call them, I just showed up. And I walk in there and the girl's playing Farmville. And I told her, like, listen, I don't mind you doing this when there's nothing going on or you're doing your job, but there's tons of stuff here. Like, you're about to make me do your job. We ultimately had to let her go. I didn't have to do that very often. Like, the staff we have, yeah, they're maybe on Instagram and stuff during the day. But when there's something that needs to get done, they get it done. And they don't go out of their way to not, like, to avoid work. So I think a lot of people's issues come from hiring the wrong staff as a site director. So your job will be a lot easier as a site director. And then you may have, let's say you get 3 A players in a row that you hired, and then the 4th hire is like a B player. What will happen is that B player will take down all the 3 A players down to their level, because people are human beings and they want to do the least amount of work possible, because work is what it sounds like. Work, it's energy. It's actually, if you think about us being organisms, like, we have to expend a lot of energy, a lot of ATP in our bodies to get some biological processes accomplished. Well, when it requires like mental efforts, people will take the path of least resistance because we're biologically programmed to conserve energy. So if you hire like 3 A players in a row and then the 4th one's a B player, that B player is bringing down those 3A players to B level. So be very careful who you hire, who you bring in, especially if you have a small team. Now, the minute you see something like that you don't like and you have a feeling, hey, this is going to bring the culture down, you need to step in there as site director, whether that's something like, oh, no, that's not my study, I don't want to help, or that's not my job description. Like, those are, to me, red flags for getting involved and stopping it before it becomes a problem. Because even if no one else has that attitude, if one person starts with that attitude and everyone else sees they can get away with it, pretty soon everyone's doing that. And then when you try to call it out, they all point to, well, when they do it, this didn't happen. So stop it immediately. And that's the part where, like, working remotely, I don't have as much control over. Now I rely on my business partner, Jaime Valles in this case. I was just off the phone with him. He kind of is doing a good job in that regard, but he's not full-time there. So as a site director, and we're going to do a vlog on this, like I said, when I start going back to the clinic again, but there's the human resources element. So there's the element of the staff and the coordinators, and really that's the most important part. Then there's the physicians or the investigators, there's the patients, and there's the sponsors and the CRAs. So it's really like those 4 stakeholders that you've got to keep happy. And if you can keep them all happy, like, that's ultimately your job. Your job as a site director, keep your employees happy, keep your monitors happy in the form of sponsors and CROs, keep your patients happy, and keep your physicians happy. It sounds simple. It's almost impossible to do because sometimes what makes one happy makes the other one mad. So it's very hard to do it all, and it's not really an attainable goal necessarily, but it's something you should strive for. It's like an idealistic goal, and you can get close. And I really think you need to keep the coordinators happy because they can keep the patients happy, and that culture is very important. So anyways, when I wake up, first thing I do, like once I start working, is I'll check emails. I'll check any emails I missed from the day before, and I'll start prioritizing, and I'll start forwarding emails to whoever is in charge. And I don't care if it's redundant. If they already were on the original email, I'll forward it with some notes of mine, like, hey, make sure that, and whatever specifics in regards to that study. Even if that person's already on the original email, that's my management style. It's like, they need to know that this is important, or maybe they already know it's important, but they want to know more specifics, like what I think we should do about this. Because ultimately, being a site director means you're directing people to work the way you want the outcomes to be achieved. Not how they want to do it, how you want to do it. And ultimately, you are held responsible. If you're the site owner and the site director, you hold yourself responsible, but ultimately the market will hold you responsible. I had a business partner a long time ago, several businesses ago. He was a site director, site owner. We went our separate ways, but we remained close. And no one could work for him. He was a tyrant, and it was his way or the highway, which there's nothing wrong with that. But there's something wrong with forcing it on people when maybe that's not what they signed up for. The moment you hire them, or even before, like in the interview, hey, this is how it works here. This is what we do. So that site director coordinator relationship is super important. So I wake up, I check emails, I check what emails I missed from the day before. I have this tool for my emails. I'm not sponsored by them, but Spark. It's AI, which kind of helps me keep my inbox organized, and you can do it for free too, but it's just extra steps. This makes it easier. Forward emails to the right people, and I kind of do that throughout the day as the emails come out. Then I look for visits for that day, because our metrics for our site and I believe most sites should operate this way, is key performance indicators is visits per week. And last year, we did a really good job, and that was a function of having really good studies. This year so far, it's March of 2025, we've had difficult studies, so it's been very hard to keep those metrics of patients per week at the same level as they were last week or last year. And this is a function I have to determine as a site director. Is this a function of employee effort, or is this a function of the studies we have and you can't get water out of a rock? And you determine which one of those it is. And by the way, whatever your key performance indicators are, that's what you should do. But in my case, for our site, they are patient visits a week. We really need to have between 10 to 15 patient visits a week. And this year, we really need to have 15 or more a week. We've been nowhere close to that. I don't think we've ever had a week like that this year. And again, I had to analyze, is that a function of the staff not trying, or is it a function of the studies? I determine it's a function of the studies we have. Thankfully, we do have 2 studies coming up where we should be able to correct this issue. But you're solving your day-to-day problems, which become weekly problems, which become monthly problems, which become yearly problems, which become make or break your business type of problems. So if you need to really be there on a day-to-day basis. I know there's site directors that do it all remotely. I've been doing it remotely now for the past month, maybe month and a half. I don't think it's as beneficial as being in the office. And I was not in the office every day, but 2-3 days a week just to get an overall feel of what the culture is like over there. I think it's a must. Also, employees feel more comfortable if you're there to come and talk to you as opposed to calling you. It's just more friction. The text, hey, do you have time for a call? I think as a site director, your main job is really to keep those 4 stakeholders happy. And the biggest one to keep happy is the coordinators, because they'll help keep the other 3 stakeholders happy for you. And I like to put less effort into getting the same outcomes, less time into getting the same outcomes. So rather than individually trying to make coordinators happy, patients happy, physicians happy, and sponsors happy, I've learned if I can just focus the majority of my effort, like 80%, on the coordinator, they'll take care of the other 3. And then my other 20%, I can kind of roam where there's like urgent fires. And I really like the Eisenhower matrix. Dwight D. Eisenhower, I think in World War II, came up with this Eisenhower matrix of like how to prioritize things. And it's urgent and important quadrants. So the things you want to focus on are what's urgent and important. Then the next quadrant is urgent, not important. And then after that, it's not urgent, important. And then what you don't want to focus any time on is not urgent, not important. So if you got to figure out where to put your tasks, your daily tasks, and then your staff will ask you too, like, this person's asking me to do this. This one wants this. These ones want this. There's only 8 hours in my day. What do I do today? And you got to tell them, you got to do this little equation in your head quickly and be able to let them know, I want you to do this, and then do this tomorrow until something comes up tomorrow. So prioritizing is important, but focusing on the coordinators, focusing on that day, what needs to get done. In my case, it's specifically patient visits. If we have a patient that no-shows, lately we've been having a lot of patient no-shows because we've been having a lot of psychiatric trials, and in psych studies, the patients decide one day not to come, whereas the previous day they decided, yeah, tomorrow's a good day to come in. Tomorrow comes around, it's not a good day for them. It's understandable. It's part of the condition. You have to be able to prepare for this. So once I started seeing this being a pattern for the psych studies, double, triple book, because you know that 1 or 2 are not going to show up. And if all three show up, we need people to help get involved and start helping out with the process. Another thing I do besides checking on patient visits is looking at what the PIs are doing and what the PIs are interested in. So if there's nothing going on for a PI, I look for, well, can they help recruit patients? Can they help? If they're busy enough with the visits, I leave them alone. I just make sure, hey, do you know that this monitor is coming in today? Surprisingly, I've noticed that the PIs, even if you tell them repeatedly, they're not going to remember a day that a monitor is coming. So I always tell my coordinator for that study, make sure you remind the PI, whether it's a Zoom meeting, whether it's an in-person meeting, the monitor is coming. Also, keep them up to date on the latest happenings of their studies, because they've got a lot going on and you don't want them to be caught off guard when a monitor asks them a question about something. So that's where I start getting into a little bit of the PIs. Some of the PIs are more concerned with the financial situation of the studies. So I kind of keep them up to date on what's missing, why we're not performing well, why his or her payments might be less this time around than before. That's often a opportunity to have a discussion about more recruitment, or considering different types of studies, or considering other providers they could refer me to. So I spend a good amount of my time during the day dealing with the physicians, and then with the clinicians as well, with the other clinicians. So the nurse practitioners. I mentioned my business partner, nurse practitioner, Jaime Valles, whom I've interviewed here before. He's going to be at SOS. They often are very well connected in the community. Then I start shifting to patient recruitment. So what are we doing as far as getting more patients for these existing studies, because these patients are going to run out. This is when I figured out Patient Ace, which is my other startup company with Ronick. Ronick really runs the show with a team at Patient Ace, but we use Patient Ace to get study leads. Well, it turns out because it's a new portal, you got to tweak it. Maybe you're not getting enough leads one day, and you won't know unless you get communication from your coordinators. Maybe I need to increase the budget for the depression study, but decrease the budget for the COPD study. Or maybe Facebook rejected the ad, but none of the coordinators told me about it. I've got to figure it out. So if you can have access to these tools, it's even better, because you don't even need to ask anyone. You can just kind of see, hey, normally we get like 10 leads a day for this bipolar study. We haven't gotten any for a few days. What's going on? And then you can start talking to your vendors about things that don't work. Another thing I do is, as a site director, is look at workflow efficiencies. So I'm on a panel at Save Our Sites. One of the two panels I'm moderating is about artificial intelligence and tools that you could use at your site. Well, this plays right into workflow efficiency. So I mentioned my email, Spark AI. It's AI-enabled email. Kind of helps my email be more efficient. Mike and his team, Mike, who's going to be on our panel with us at SOS, Mike Wenger, he's going to have the link for the open source standard operating procedures for how sites can use AI for their workflows. And one of them is creating source document templates for your studies. And I know that's been a huge part of our startup for a new study, which I'm going to get to next, is business development, by the way, but is creating source and programming the source within Creo. And AI can create the source templates really quickly, really clean. They're getting better. I use ChatGPT for it. I do have the paid version, but these things are getting better and better. And you just got to master the prompts. And Mike, who's on the panel with me at SOS, he has an open source SOP for how sites can use artificial intelligence in their workflow if they want. And he also has best practices, like what's the best prompts for making a source template, or what's the best prompts for following up with a patient. So I'm always looking for ways to automate the workflow. And you have to kind of try to figure out the bottlenecks of the studies. So where are the bottlenecks occurring? Are the bottlenecks occurring in recruitment? Like, is it in the pre-screening? Are the bottlenecks occurring getting the patients in? Can you figure out a patient reminder? One of the sponsors of this podcast, Crio, CRIO, they help you with some of this workflow planning. You can program study visits. You can program auto texting. They're getting Crio. What I like about Crio, and they're not only a sponsor of my podcast, they're a sponsor of Save Our Sites conference. What they do is they reinvest part of their profits regularly into building new tools, and AI is definitely a part of that. So part of my job as a site director is to identify the inefficiencies, and I'd rather have my coordinators doing high-level work rather than low-level grunt work. And I'm always playing around, at least at my site, with AI for automatically entering EDC, which it didn't really work yet, but we're trying to get there, or automatically texting patients, or automatically responding to patients when they respond to a lead, or, like I said, creating source documents for a study, or a whole bunch of other things, maybe having a co-pilot for one of your studies. So always look for ways to give your coordinators higher level work and not lower level grunt work. And I think AI is going to be a huge part of this going forward, and it's going to make site director's job actually more complicated at first, because you're going to be the one that needs to vet the systems. You're going to be the one that needs to figure out the regulations behind it. I talked to another site director last week, and she was asking me, hey, what's your policy for contacting patients with private health information? And I told her, hey, you should have a SOP for that, because if you cannot text a patient something about their medical condition, you can have that conversation on a phone call, but you can't leave a voicemail, because what if someone else hears it? What if their ex-wife, what if you got the wrong number and it's their ex-wife's number? And they know about their ex-husband's personal health information. It's technically HIPAA violation. And so as a site director, like, there are tools and there are things you can do. Like, every site director would want their coordinators to call, follow up, be enthusiastic about communicating with patients. But you also have to bring in the defense. So I like to look at offense and defense, and believe me, I'm all offensive minded. But as a site director in a very highly regulated industry, you need to be able to play defense well too. And that means no texting personal health information, no leaving voicemails about condition XYZ. We don't know if that's even their number. If they initiate on a text thread, you can then reply, but you cannot lead with, hey, for depression, or hey, for bipolar, because we don't know who's looking at their phone. We don't even know if it's their phone. A lot of people put someone else's phone number in their family because they don't want to get spammed. And so PHI is important, and then having SOPs for these, and then tweaking the SOPs based on new technologies that come out. And then another question I had from a fellow site director was in regards to flyers and having scripts, and do they need to be IRB approved, and what's the ROI of community engagement? And you've got to figure out what's working and what's not. One of the things we do, we're actually having another panel on this with Daniel, the videographer here, is marketing and doing community videos for the community that you're in. Like, people might say, well, what's the ROI on that? And I don't know. I don't have a ROI yet, but do you have a certain part of your budget that's dedicated towards experimenting with new things? Because if that works to get your brand awareness out, even if it's for one extra patient a quarter, is it worth it? To me, the answer is yes. But you need to have a way to track who's coming in. And that's actually one of the other things we're discussing at the SOS panel, And if you're gonna miss Save Our Sites, don't worry. On this YouTube channel, we're uploading all the panel sessions here anyway, so you're gonna be able to see them all. But that's another thing you gotta do is experiment with new tools that come out. Finally, business development. You gotta be looking 6 months, 12 months in the future of what studies you can get. You cannot relax. This is why I love our other sponsor, Inato. Once you get a little bit of experience for your PI, you can get on Inato's website. You get studies for free. You just got to go through the feasibility process. Of course, it's work, but this is something you can allocate to some of your staff, but you need to be on top of it. Because one thing I've noticed is when you start giving too much or too wide of a variety of tasks to coordinators, they don't know what to prioritize. And most site directors just say everything or figure it out based on my mood. And I mean, not to say I'm not that way either. I'm a human, but at least I'm aware of the fact that it's a tough situation for a coordinator if you don't communicate and let them know what to prioritize and what not to. So even though I outsource a good amount of business development, meaning finding more studies to my staff, I am directly involved. I do the follow-up. I just signed a CDA earlier today for a study, a potential new study. I know what's going on. I won't get involved in the study startup and all those things, but I know what's involved and at least what we have coming up. And then at the site, we have a whiteboard of potential studies that we're tracking. We've played around with figuring out a CRM like Salesforce to track studies and follow up with them. Honestly, the easiest way to do it is a whiteboard in your office. Where are we at? What's missing for this study? Did we get it? Did we not get it? When are we starting screening? Some way to keep track of what's going on. And then you've got to keep track of financials. So business development was not the last thing, but you got to keep track of the financial health of your site. So if you have someone that's delegated to do your contracts and budgets, which we do with Chris Sauber, you got to know what your costs are going to be for like third-party costs. Like, what's an MRI going to cost you? First of all, can you even find those kind of vendors? One of my challenges here in Yuma is there's not that many vendors. So we're at the mercy of like one or two maybe. And so a lot of times those vendors, they have to do certain things in order for you to even be able to do the study. A lot of times I go out and have to get them involved. And that wasn't one of the 4 stakeholders I discussed. That's like a 4.5 is your external vendors. But a lot of times those vendors are very important and you need their cooperation. So I have relationships with the key vendors in our community where when things go wrong and you need something urgent, you're not having your coordinator dealing with the front desk staff of some vendor. I'm calling their director and telling them, listen, I need this done. Can you get it done? I can do it on your behalf. Is this correct? And then I got to figure out what's in it for them too. Like a lot of times they don't really care about the extra revenue they're getting, but what they might want is relationships with some of my physicians. So I already figured it out with some of the vendors in town. What is attractive to them about our studies is not the money they're getting. They have plenty of that in an underserved town like this. There's no issues with that. It's access to the physicians. And so I do have that. So you have to know what your assets are, where your liabilities are, where your Achilles heels are at. I'm listening to the book, The Iliad by Homer, and Achilles is one of the key figures, but his Achilles heel was his heel. That's why it's called Achilles heel. So you got to know what your Achilles heel is for your site. For me, it's vendors. And I got to work with the vendors. In my other locations where I was at, Orange County, no issues. Let's say one vendor wasn't able to do what we need. There's like 100 other vendors we can choose from. Here, not the case. So we got to be very careful with our vendors. We got to establish good relationships with them. Community outreach, I kind of mentioned that with the videos, but it goes beyond that. There's community events. You got to figure out which events are working, which are not. One of my coordinators, Lana, who does the Jazz Fest every month, or I think it's every week now, in the winter, reports that she's getting leads from there rather than this other event called Howling at the Moon, where I actually personally went with her to both of them, and I saw the difference. And there's no doubt the Jazz Fest produces way more leads than Howling at the Moon. It makes zero sense to spend the same amount of time on Howling at the Moon where you can just spend that time at the Jazz Fest. I would have never known that unless I actually went myself a few times. And so as part of a site director, you've got to go out and do things like that. Maybe not every day, but regularly. Another thing I do is check in with all of the medical assistants that work with our PIs. So these are not my direct employees, but I make sure they know who I am. So when I walk in their office and I ask them for referral help, they're not looking at me weird. They know that I'm involved with their boss, and by extension, I'm kind of someone they should try to help. But you still got to be nice to them. You still got to bring them coffee every now and then, bring them some lunch. We've done catering at the clinics for the medical staff, not my staff, the clinician staff, just to get more enthusiasm and engagement on their part. So these are some of the day-to-day things I do as a site director. There's obviously random fires that need to be put out by CRAs. We got a request just today from one of our studies, a super important study that we need to get. We officially got selected for, but they need Judy access, which is this safety portal. And not all my coordinators were doing it because they didn't understand what that was. I had to explain and prioritize. You've got to make this a priority. Now it's done. Those kind of daily things, putting out fires, answering queries, bigger queries. Sometimes I'm getting feedback from the monitors. Hey, why are we not getting queries answered timely manner? There's temperature excursions here or there. You got to monitor the temperature of the IP 24/7. So that's a daily task. I've been seeing a few excursions lately, so I've been staying up on top of that with one of my coordinators who's in charge of that study. So on a day-to-day basis, that's how it goes. Keep coordinators happy, keep PIs happy, keep sponsors happy, keep patients happy, and really keep coordinators happy so they can keep those other three happy. And then if you're in an underserved town like I am, you got to keep the community vendors happy because you don't have that many. That's it. Like, subscribe, comment, share, and stay tuned for the vlog where you could actually see some of this on a random day. Who knows what it's going to be, but it'll be a real day in the life of a site director. Like, subscribe, comment, share. Don't forget the book, and then saveoursites.com. If you missed this conference, there's another one. Bye-bye. Hey, if you guys like that kind of content, make sure you like, subscribe, comment, share. Stay tuned for more videos.